The movie Back to the Future wasn't the only one. It was a turning point in the history of pop culture. The wild-haired doctor, the time-traveling DeLorean, and Marty McFly's legendary skateboarding abilities. Decades later, it is still played on television after becoming a huge hit and winning hearts all over the world. However, even such a great had its mistakes, and there is one scene that people still discuss. Because of a blooper you were never supposed to see, not because of the tale. Unexpectedly, there are several. Come along with us as we examine the secrets and blunders that nearly went unnoticed. A film that went directly into history and over time. In 1985, Back to the Future was released. It was not your typical science fiction film. Yes, it featured time travel, but it also had heart, humor, and drama. The movie, which was written and directed by Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, became one of the decade's biggest hits very fast. The primary part was portrayed by Michael J. Fox. A teenage kid named Marty McFly inadvertently finds himself in the past. He travels across time in a DeLorean vehicle built by his strange but endearing pal Doc Brown, Christopher Lloyd. When Marty first meets his youthful parents and unintentionally prevents them from falling in love, turmoil begins. He could vanish forever if he is unable to mend it. In 1980, the concept for Back to the Future was initially conceived. Gale and Zemeckis had previously collaborated, although their work had not been very successful. This was the big thing they needed. However, first, no one wanted it. It was rejected by more than 40 studios. Why? It wasn't enough obscene. Adult jokes were common in comedy at the time. Everyone had more fun and everything was cleaner. After Zemeckis directed Romancing the Stone, things took a different turn. Universal Pictures became interested all of a sudden. Casting was also difficult. Although he wasn't available, the team wanted Michael J. Fox to play Marty. Thus, Eric Stoltz was employed. However, Zemeckis discovered Stoltz wasn't a good fit for the role a few weeks into the filming process. He took the risk of recasting Fox. They had to reshoot scenes and pay an additional $4 million, but it was the right decision. Everything fell into place with Fox in the forefront. The film was completed in April 1985 after being shot in California. Some thrilling test screenings followed. The release date was moved to July 3, right in time for summer, because audiences loved it so much. As a result, the editing schedule was constrained, and some special effects were not completed. However, that was irrelevant. The film was an enormous hit. It became the biggest movie of 1985 with $381,100,000. Fans loved it, critics applauded it, and even the news and Huey Lewis's theme song, The Power of Love, became popular. Back to the Future remains popular years later. Indeed, it was chosen for preservation by the U.S. Library of Congress in February 2007. It was more than a film. It turned into a moment of culture. The magic didn't merely happen in front of the camera, as is the case with many outstanding movies. It was equally fascinating behind the scenes. You recognize the visage of Crispin Glover. George McFly, Marty's awkward yet endearing father, is remembered by most fans. Crispin Glover played him in the first film. But an odd thing happened when the second film came out. Glover never returned, but George McFly did show up. How? The filmmakers used a mold of Glover's face that had been created for the first movie, rather than just picking a new actor and going on. They made prosthetics with it and wore them on Jeffrey Weissman, another actor. It appeared to be Glover from a distance, but it wasn't. And that turned into a major issue. It did not make Crispin Glover pleased. The fact that someone else played the part didn't bother him. The fact that they utilized his face and appearance without his consent disturbed him. He subsequently clarified that it would have been quite legal and I would have been perfectly okay if they had simply hired a different actor, which is essentially what I believed had occurred. Glover filed a lawsuit because they used his face mold without his consent. He filed a lawsuit. Although the matter was ultimately resolved, it brought up significant issues regarding the usage of an actor's picture. With the advent of deepfakes and artificial intelligence, this is even more crucial. It was more than just a private dispute. It was a significant Hollywood event that altered the terms of contracts and the use of faces. Learning and forgetting were constants for Michael J. Fox. It was difficult to play Marty McFly. The character was more than just cool and amusing. He had extraordinary talent as well. Marty learned how to shoot a rifle, ride a horse in the Old West, play guitar on stage, and skateboard like a pro in 3 different movies. However, many people are unaware of this. Michael J. Fox truly did learn all of those things. Fox was serious about his role. He didn't want to pretend. He desired to appear as though he was an expert in his field. That required picking up new abilities one after the other. "I feel like I was in school all the time," he said. "I was being taught something. I would do one thing. For example, I would learn how to ride a horse, fire a rifle, skateboard, or play the guitar. Something is always there. I learned about a million different skills, and I've forgotten them all," he added, laughing. It's a powerful quote. It demonstrates both his commitment and the hurried nature of the filming. He was practicing a guitar solo at one point. The next, he was mounted. You wouldn't know that from watching the movies, even though he might have forgotten those skills now. He gave the impression that Marty could do it all naturally. You might have missed the blooper, the motions, and the music. Marty's portrayal of Johnny B. Good at the school dance is among the original film's most memorable moments. Marty goes even wilder, jumping, tumbling, and tearing it up on stage as the crowd goes crazy. Did you know that Michael J. Fox actually studied the guitar solo note by note? It's a fan favorite. He had played the guitar since he was a teenager, but this was something new. He desired the ideal appearance. They had already recorded the music. Fox collaborated with Paul Hansen, a teacher. They dissected the music in detail. In this manner, every finger movement would correspond with the sound when Fox played it on screen. To arrange the dancing steps, he even collaborated with a choreographer. His attempt to emulate the look of vintage rock icons was successful. The energy in that scene is palpable at every moment. This is where things become even more complicated. Marty engages with himself as multiple incarnations in various eras later on in the series. As a result, the camera had to record 2 different Foxes in the same frame, frequently conversing with one another. Director Robert Zemeckis devised a method because standard cameras couldn't accomplish that without appearing phony. He requested that ILM create a unique camera known as the VistaGlide, a robotic motion-controlled camera that made flawless shots possible. In order to accomplish these splits, Zemeckis clarified, "We had to devise a mechanism that would allow me to shift the camera and place 2 performers in the same frame." It was so successful that those scenes are still relevant today. Nevertheless, not every scenario was flawless despite all of that meticulous preparation. There was a single, uncut moment that made it into the final cut. It was a minor error, a blooper. You can't unsee it once you've noticed it, though. It's much more entertaining to find out that it got past editing. Because sometimes small things go unnoticed by everyone, regardless of how large the budget is or how skilled the staff is. Additionally, those small details frequently turn into fan favorites. Having said that, there are many excellent lines in Back to the Future, but one particular joke, in which the president is made the punchline, stands out for bridging the past and present. Doc Brown reacts incredulously when Marty McFly informs him that Ronald Reagan is president in 1985. "The actor," he yells. Today's viewers may find this to be only a humorous line. However, at the time, it was also a witty reference to Reagan's previous career as a movie star. Before going into politics, he had acted in a number of movies between the late 1930s and the early 1960s. It might seem that a politician would be offended by being made fun of in a film, but Reagan really found the joke hilarious. He requested that his projectionist rewind and play it again because he liked it so much. It amused him to that extent. Reagan enjoyed the entire film as well. He actually cited it when he said, "Where we're going, we don't need roads," in his 186th State of the Union speech. Doc Brown said that in the movie. A president rarely makes such a joke about himself. It demonstrated how entertaining and potent the film had grown. Presidents were quoting it as well. Although Reagan found the comedy amusing, there were also situations in the movie that were a bit more somber for the performers who worked behind the scenes when Marty was someone else. Although Michael J. Fox is well known for his role as Marty McFly, many people are unaware that he wasn't the first actor to portray the character. Although Fox was first considered for the position, Eric Stoltz was chosen instead after the producers of his television program, Family Ties, stated that he was unable to work on both projects. Stoltz even began filming with the film crew, but something didn't feel quite right. He didn't seem to match the part as director Robert Zemeckis had envisioned. They kept firing with Stoltz while they tried to reclaim Fox. Fox was ecstatic to have the opportunity to read the screenplay at last. "I've never read a better script in my life," he stated. Even though it meant putting in a lot of overtime on both the film and his sitcom, he agreed to shoot the movie since he loved the story. Surprisingly, though, not all of Stoltz's work was destroyed. A remnant of him remains in the film. Something seems odd when Marty hits Biff in the diner scene. With the lights out, Biff appears a bit more youthful. The actor who played Biff, Thomas F. Wilson, even acknowledged that he believes Eric Stoltz punched him in the cafe in the 1950s. Although it's a minor touch, viewers who pay close attention will find it to be a cool reminder of the film that nearly was. And it wasn't just Eric Stoltz who demonstrated new abilities. A few members of the cast performed their own stunts with skill. Getting the kiss, riding horses, and learning ropes. The character's journey to the untamed West in the third installment of Back to the Future. With horses, historic cities, and Western battles, the film gave the narrative a fresh vibe. Thomas F. Wilson portrayed Buford Mad Dog Tannen, a rugged cowboy and Biff's ancestor, in this round of the trilogy. He lived the role, not just played it. In fact, Wilson himself learned how to toss a lasso and ride a horse. Writer Bob Gale claims that Tom Wilson learned how to ride and throw that lariat over the course of many hours. He is the one doing it. Since it's actually him doing everything, that makes the action sequences even more entertaining to watch. The surprises don't end there, though. In Part 3, Christopher Lloyd, who portrayed Von Doc Brown, had a significant moment of his own. He was given more attention than Marty this time. We had once thought Doc was a crazy genius. However, this film revealed a more compassionate side. A good-hearted schoolteacher named Clara wins his heart. In addition to being a charming scene in the narrative, their kiss marks Christopher Lloyd's very first on-screen kiss. Yes, exactly. Never previously been kissed on screen in a motion picture, as Bob Gale stated. It gave Doc Brown's persona a fresh dimension. This time, instead of focusing only on Marty's universe, the creators decided to explore his. Although the surprise love tale they provided us worked, not all of the scenes were romantic or seamless. Behind the scenes, some created tension. Tensions erupted when the dog vanished. Einstein, Doc Brown's dog, was a major player in the time travel experiment. However, test audiences viewed what viewers thought was an interesting experiment quite differently. Many onlookers believed the dog had been killed when Einstein vanished after being placed into the DeLorean. They had not yet seen any advertising or trailers, and they were unaware that it was a time machine. Bob Gale claims that because the crowd believed we killed that dog, there was an uneasy silence. It demonstrates the impact of the film's opening sequences and the lack of knowledge they had before seeing it. Fortunately, viewers quickly discovered that Einstein had just traveled through time and was perfectly fine. Nevertheless, it serves as a reminder of how unexpected stories may be when they are told for the first time. However, not every surprise was included in the script. Some resulted from disagreements while filming. George McFly's actor Crispin Glover was well known for having strong opinions about how his character ought to act. He requested to use a broomstick in one scene, but director Robert Zemeckis objected. Other performers fled to their dressing rooms because the argument became so loud. "I stuck my head out of the dressing room, and Chris Lloyd did the same," Michael J. Fox recounted. "We exchanged glances and said, 'Thank God, that had nothing to do with us.'" Even if it resulted in conflicts, Glover's enthusiasm for the job was evident. These scenes demonstrate the amount of effort, discussion, and passion that went into the film's creation. Every scene, every detail, and every behind-the-scenes moment added something authentic, which is part of the reason why Back to the Future still feels relevant today. odd decisions, lost opportunities, and a near miss. Returning to the future. The second part continues where the first one left off. When Doc arrives, he informs Marty and his girlfriend that in order to support their children, they must go to the future. The time travel doesn't end there, though. In the end, Marty travels back to the 1950s to prevent the elder Biff from handing his younger self a sports almanac. He would be able to alter the timeline entirely and win wagers thanks to that book. However, this was not the sequel's initial idea. According to writer Bob Gale, they had originally intended to go to the 1960s in the first draft of the script. "We had them going to 1967 or 68, he claimed. As a flower child, Lorraine is incarcerated. We thought it would be entertaining to see Doc Brown smoke, but Robert Zemeckis, the director, had a different plan. Why not return to the original film instead of exploring a new location? The audience would be able to watch the events from a different perspective in this fashion." Since it had never been done before, the second film's use of the first sequences in a novel way made it something completely original. However, not everyone was pleased with the first film's conclusion. Crispin Glover, who portrayed George, Marty's father, had some reservations about the film's content. Marty returns to a better version of himself at the end of the first film. His family has more money. Even the car is better, and his parents are happier. That did not sit well with Glover. "I didn't think it was a good idea for our characters to have a monetary reward," he told filmmaker Robert Zemeckis. "The reward ought to be love." He disagreed with the movie's message, which he thought was that having money equates to happiness. Glover didn't return for part 2 in part because of this disagreement. He was paid significantly less than other actors like Leah Thompson and Thomas F. Wilson, which was another factor. "It simply wasn't fair," Glover remarked. The financial disparity and creative differences prevented him from returning, despite his desire to do so. However, some actors needed a little encouragement to say yes, while others simply left. In the third movie, Mary Steenburgen played Doc Brown's romantic interest, Clara. She infused the role with warmth and kindness. According to Bob Gale, Mary wasn't initially certain, but her children pleaded with her to do it after they enjoyed the first 2 films. Gale clarified that her children said, "Oh, Mom, you must be in a film about the future." Steenburgen accepted the position after meeting with the team. Although it wasn't always easy to film, her chemistry with Christopher Lloyd gave the love story a genuine sense. In one scenario, Tannen, the insane dog, hangs Marty. Something went wrong, but it was supposed to be a stunt. The rope began to cut off his air, according to what Michael J. Fox later reported in his book Lucky Man. "At the end of the rope, I swung unconscious for a few seconds," he added. Fortunately, the crew discovered it in time, and he suffered no significant injuries. Although it was a frightening moment, near misses weren't limited to the camera. There were significant what-ifs even in casting choices. We nearly had more bloopers with the Doctor. Though he wasn't the only actor chosen for the role, Christopher Lloyd became famous for his portrayal of Doc Brown. Author Bob Gale revealed that Jeff Goldblum, another well-known personality, was on the verge of being cast. According to Gale, Jeff Goldblum was the only other candidate we gave serious consideration for Doc Brown. Gale distinctly recalled meeting Goldblum, and they also discussed John Lithgow. They ultimately chose Lloyd, who made a lasting impression in the part. However, not every scene in the movie was flawless, despite the excellent casting. Even yet, a few bloopers made it to the final cut. When Marty plays a 1985 videotape for the 1955 documentary, it's one of the worst blunders. "Never mind that now," the Doctor says in the video. "Now don't worry about that." However, the camera was down at Marty's side and not recording while he was filming it before. Nevertheless, that precise line appears in the video when we watch it later. In the scene where the clock tower is saved, another mistake occurs. The same man can be seen in the background going in the same direction twice as he walks around the bend. Even though it's a minor error, those with keen eyes caught it. The flyer itself comes next. Sometimes it appears wrinkled when Marty shows it to Doc, and other times it appears brand new. The flyer's appearance varies from shot to shot. The video recording scene features yet another amusing gaffe. Marty begins discussing plutonium just after Doc states 1.21 gigawatts in the original audio. However, the doctor in the video is still talking when the 1955 doctor watches the clip. "What did I just say?" is the response that 1955 doc gives. The timing is totally incorrect. You'll also notice something strange if you take a closer look at the leaflet the woman offers Marty about saving the clock tower. Later in the film, Jennifer writes a comment on the flyer's reverse side. However, the text is already on the flyer when Marty first receives it. Although these little errors don't detract from the film, they are enjoyable to identify once you know what to look for. It demonstrates that even the greatest movies occasionally contain little flaws that add to their allure. Little details like continuity mistakes, background extras, acts that repeat, and items that change between shots serve as a reminder that no movie is flawless. However, sometimes those flaws make it much more adored. Because humans still create the magic behind it. Factual errors that have persisted over time. Marty is shown in one of the opening sequences in Back to the Future preparing to play the guitar through Doc's enormous amplifier. He inserts the cable into the amplifier, turns all the knobs to maximum, and then plugs the guitar into the amplifier. This would have produced a loud burst or blast as soon as the cable hit the guitar, as any guitarist knows. The amp should have burst at that very time. To avoid this, guitarists in real life plug in both ends before turning on the amplifier, while the movie does it the other way around. When Doc sets the time machine to December 2000 to see the birth of Christ, another mistake occurs. First, according to historians, Jesus was not born in year 0 but rather around 4 or 6 BC. Second, the calendar system does not have a year 0000. Even if the year were accurate, the DeLorean would have landed in California rather than close to Bethlehem, and it jumps from 1 BC to 1 AD. Later on, however, Robert Zemeckis said that this was a joke. When you think about it, though, the line doesn't make much sense. Doc's loading of the DeLorean with plutonium is another instance. He makes use of a red liquid in a glass tube. In actuality, plutonium is a gray or silver metal. The liquid isn't crimson at all. When real plutonium comes into contact with air, it flakes apart and turns brown or black. Another factual problem arises during a straightforward TV illusion. In 1955, Marty informs someone that on November 5, he watched an episode of The Honeymooners called The Man from Space. However, that date was not the airing date of that episode. In fact, it was broadcast in December. The Sleepwalker was the episode that aired on November 5. Doc's discussion of using the time circuits to travel to the birth of Christ is another strange instance. No matter how quickly it moves, the DeLorean could never make it from California to the Middle East, aside from the year error. However, there were problems with more than simply the writing. Additionally, some of the objects and visual effects revealed more than the creators intended, exposing errors that you can actually see. The DeLorean is seen from a distance in the scene in the mall parking lot while Marty is being pursued by the terrorists. Fans might not be aware that the driver at that precise moment is Eric Stoltz. Before Michael J. Fox was cast, these were filmed. The original scenes were included in the final cut because the shots were too wide to properly show the driver's face. In another scene, Marty consults a 1955 phone book to find Doc's address, but the close-up of the hand turning the page seems inconsistent. It's not Marty's teen hand, rather, it's the hand of an elderly man with obvious age spots. Doc pilots the DeLorean at the beginning of the film using a remote control. However, upon closer inspection, the battery meter displays 0 volts. This indicates that the gadget is truly off. Nevertheless, it appears that Doc is utilizing it to operate the vehicle. When Marty and Jennifer are hurrying to go to school, they make another error. Although it is meant to be early morning, it is evident from the windows at the end of the corridor that it is dark outside. The DeLorean is on the verge of catching the lightning bolt in the third movie. Before the automobile gets any electricity from the bolt, the flux capacitor illuminates. Though technically it begins too early, that blue glow is supposed to indicate that time travel is about to occur. Although these minor incidents don't detract from the movie, they demonstrate that even a successful film like Back to the Future may have its share of embarrassing moments. However, upon closer inspection, A few minor background mistakes reveal even more intriguing tales. Background information that doesn't add up. Biff is getting a beer in the kitchen at the start of the movie. He gripes that George only has light beer. However, if you look closely, you'll notice that the refrigerator door has 3 cans of Budweiser on the shelf. That's definitely not light beer. When Marty awakens in his bed in 1985, it's another odd moment. RQ, a yellow magazine, is behind him. This is an acronym for Reference Quarterly, a periodical specifically designed for librarians. The creators acknowledged in the DVD commentary that the set dresser made a mistake. That wouldn't be in Marty's room as a typical teen. Doc gives Marty a drawing of a flux capacitor in another scenario, although the drawing's label reads flux compressor. The label is obviously incorrect because that's not what it's called in the story. Another clip shows Marty pursuing George after he exits the diner. However, Marty already knows Doc needs help and has his address before then. He has no compelling incentive to pursue George. He and him do not yet share a deep emotional connection. He appears to be acting only as required by the plot. Some fans claim that the scene feels forced because of this. At last, Marty asks Doc if gasoline is used to power the vehicle. Doc thinks plutonium, which is stronger, is needed. However, Doc claims in Part 3 that the automobile itself runs on ordinary petrol and that the flux capacitor is powered by plutonium. For fans who meticulously watch all 3 films, this causes confusion. These minor details may not be noticeable to casual viewers, but they are noticeable to enthusiasts who have seen the trilogy numerous times. They remind us that even DeLorean, who has the ability to travel across time, is unable to correct every mistake. Which Back to the Future sequence is your favorite, and why? And have you already seen any of these errors or blunders? Remember to hit like and leave your opinions in the comments section below. Stay tuned for more amazing tales from the intriguing past of Hollywood by subscribing. Next time.